The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor of the Grand Meridian Hotel ballroom, and every head turned toward the groom's mother as she stood there, her face twisted in disgust, staring down at the quiet Korean woman in the simple white dress. "This is what my son is marrying." Vanessa Richardson's voice cut through the morning air like a blade, loud enough for the early arriving wedding guests to hear, loud enough for the florist and caterers to freeze in their work, loud enough to make Ji-Eun Park's heart crack just a little more than it already had over the past 6 months. The wedding wasn't supposed to start for another 3 hours, but the humiliation had begun the moment Ji-Eun arrived at the venue with her single suitcase and her quiet smile, hoping that today would be the beginning of something beautiful with Darius Richardson, the man she'd fallen in love with at a coffee shop in downtown Atlanta 2 years ago. If you've ever been made to feel small on the day you're supposed to feel like royalty, stay with me, because this story will show you what happens when the wrong family picks the wrong woman to disrespect. Ji-Eun stood there in the empty ballroom, her hands folded in front of her, her dark eyes lowered to the ground as Darius' mother circled her like a predator, examining wounded prey. And she said nothing because speaking had never been her strength. Silence had always been her armor, the same silence her father had taught her when she was 7 years old and watched him handle a business dispute with nothing but a cold stare and a phone call that ended someone's career. Vanessa Richardson was a woman who wore her status like a crown. Her designer dress probably cost more than most people's cars. Her perfectly laid edges and honey blondie highlights catching the morning sunlight that streamed through the ballroom's floor-to-ceiling windows, and she had made it clear from the moment Darius brought Ji-Eun home that she did not approve of this match. "Where is your family, sweetie?" Vanessa asked with a voice dipped in honey and laced with venom, emphasizing the word sweetie, the way you talk to a child who didn't know any better. Ji-Eun looked up briefly, her delicate features showing no emotion, and she answered in her soft, accented English. "They could not come. They are in Korea. Very busy." The answer was true, but it wasn't the whole truth, because Ji-Eun's family wasn't busy running a restaurant or a dry cleaning business like Vanessa had assumed when she first met her future daughter-in-law. They were busy running an empire that stretched from Seoul to Los Angeles, an empire built on fear, loyalty, and blood. An empire that Ji-Eun had walked away from 3 years ago when she decided she wanted a normal life, a quiet life, a life where she could love someone without that love being a strategic alliance or a power move. Vanessa's sister, Patricia, who served as the wedding planner and the family's unofficial spokesperson for all things embarrassing, stepped forward with her phone out, snapping a picture of Ji-Eun like she was documenting evidence for a future complaint, and she said loud enough for the caterers to hear, "Girl, I told Darius he could do better. I told him this quiet little thing wasn't going to fit in with our family, but he said love was enough. Love." She laughed a sob, a sharp sound that bounced off the walls, and 2 of Darius' cousins, who had just walked in with garment bags, laughed with her. And Ji-Eun felt the heat rise in her chest, but she kept her face neutral, kept her breathing steady, because losing control was not an option. Losing control meant revealing who she really was, and she had promised herself 2 years ago that she would never let that part of her life touch this new world she was building. "Let me ask you something, honey," Vanessa said, stepping so close to Ji-Eun that she could smell the expensive perfume, the kind that came in bottles shaped like art pieces. and Vanessa's finger came up to tap Ji-Eun's collarbone like she was testing the quality of merchandise. What exactly do you bring to this marriage? You work at a bookstore. You got no family here to help with connections. You don't even talk much, so what is it? What did my son see in you that made him think you were worth bringing into the Richardson family? The question hung in the air like a noose, and Ji-Eun could have answered it a dozen different ways. She could have told Vanessa about the 3 languages she spoke fluently, the degree in international business she'd earned before she walked away from her legacy, the way she taught Darius patience and kindness and shown him that love didn't have to be loud to be real, but instead she just said, "I love him, he loves me. That is enough." It should have been enough, but Vanessa's face twisted into something ugly, and she turned to Patricia and said, "This is what happens when you let your kids date outside their league. They come back with projects instead of partners." The word project landed like a record slap, and somewhere in the back of Ji-Eun's mind, in the part of her that she locked away when she moved to America, a door started to crack open. And behind that door was the girl who grew up watching her father command respect with a whisper. The girl who learnt that mercy was a choice, not a weakness. The girl whose phone contacts included people who could make problems disappear before sunrise. Darius walked into the ballroom 20 minutes later, looking sharp in his groomsman's casual fit, his dark skin glowing against the crisp white shirt, his smile bright until he saw the scene in front of him. His mother standing too close to Ji-Eun, his aunt recording something on her phone, his cousins laughing near the gift table, and his bride standing there with her head slightly bowed, like she was praying or preparing for battle. "Ma, what's going on?" Darius asked, his voice carrying that edge of concern, and Vanessa turned to him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and she said, "Baby, we were just getting to know your bride a little better, just making sure she understands what it means to be a Richardson, because this is a big day for our family, and we want to make sure everyone is on the same page." Darius looked at Ji-Eun, and she looked back at him with those dark, unreadable eyes, and for a moment he seemed like he might say something, might defend her, might tell his family to back off. But then his cousin Jamal called out from across the room, "Yo, D, your boys are here. We got that pre-game set up in the groom's suite. Come on, ma." And just like that, Darius' attention shifted. He kissed Ji-Eun on the forehead, a quick peck that felt more like a habit than affection, and he said, "You good, babe. I'll see you at the altar, okay? Just a few more hours and you'll be Mrs. Richardson." Said it like it was supposed to pawn set, like the title was a prize. And then he was gone, leaving her alone with the women who had already decided she wasn't good enough. And Gion felt something cold settle in her stomach, something that felt like the beginning of a mistake, but she pushed it down because she had come too far to turn back. Now she had burned bridges to be here. She had walked away from a throne to sit in this church pew, and she was going to see it through even if it killed the part of her that still believed in faith. The ceremony was supposed to start at 2 in the afternoon, but by noon the Richardson family had turned the pre-wedding brunch into a roasting session, with Ji-Eun as the main course, and she sat at the bride's table in the smaller banquet room, picking at her fruit plate, while Darius' grandmother, the woman everyone called Big Mama, held court at the center table, talking loud enough for the whole room to hear. I remember when Darius was dating that lawyer girl. What was her name? Simone. Now that was a woman with a future, had her own practice, came from a good family. Her daddy was a judge. But no, my grandson wanted to go find himself some quiet little foreign girl who probably can't even cook a proper meal. Big Mama laughed in the room, and the room laughed with her, and Ji-Eun's phone buzzed in her small white purse. A message from a number she hadn't seen in 3 years, a number she'd blocked and unblocked a dozen times, a number that belonged to her older brother Min-san, and the message was simple. Nuna, do you still want to pretend you're normal? Because I'm one phone call away from reminding everyone who you really are. Ji-Eun stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the reply button, and for the first time since she'd arrived at this hotel, she smiled, not a warm smile, not a happy smile, but the kind of smile her father wore when someone made the mistake of thinking his kindness was weakness. And she typed back 3 words in Korean that translated to not yet, brother, and she hit send just as the wedding. Kindermeter announced it was time for the bride to get ready, because in 2 hours, she was going to walk down that aisle and marry into a family that had spent the entire morning making sure she knew she didn't belong. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know, was that Ji-Eun Park wasn't just some quiet bookstore worker from Korea. She was the youngest daughter of Park Sang-hoon, a name that made powerful men in Seoul bow their heads. And if this family wanted to play games about status and power, and who belonged where, she was about to teach them a lesson they would never forget. If you think this wedding is going to end in happiness, you're not ready for what's coming next. Hit that subscribe button, because next chapter is going to show you exactly what happens when a woman who's been silent finally decides to speak. And come and trust me, when Ji-Eun talks, the whole world listens. Drop a comment and tell me, should she call her brother now, or should she wait until after they say I do? The bride's preparation room smelled like hairspray and broken dreams, and Ji-Eun sat perfectly still in front of the vanity mirror, while a makeup artist named Keisha worked on her face, brushing foundation over skin that didn't need much help. And the whole time Keisha kept glancing at the door like she was waiting for someone to burst in and stop this wedding before it was too late. Ji-Eun could see it in the woman's eyes, that look of pity mixed with curiosity. The same look she'd been getting all morning from the hotel staff, who had witnessed the Richardson family's treatment of their soon-to-be daughter-in-law. And it made Ji-Eun think about her mother, about the woman. Demands attention, and the strength that waits in silence until the perfect moment to strike. Her mother had been the latter, a woman who could smile at a business dinner, while simultaneously orchestrating the downfall of everyone at the table who had underestimated her. And Gion had inherited that patience, that ability to take abuse and store it away like ammunition for a war that others didn't even know was coming. Keisha asked softly, putting down the makeup brush and meeting Gion's eyes in the mirror. And there was genuine concern there, the kind that made Gion's carefully constructed walls crack just a little bit. Ji-Eun nodded, her voice barely above a whisper, when she said, "I am fine, thank you for asking." But she wasn't fine. She was standing on the edge of a decision that would change everything, and her phone kept buzzing in her purse with messages from Min. Each one more insistent than the last, each one reminding her that she had options, that she didn't have to take this disrespect. That one word from her and the Richardson family would learn what real power looked like. The door to the preparation room swung open without a knock, and Vanessa Richardson walked in with Patricia right behind her. Both of them dressed in their wedding guest finest, their faces made up like they were about to attend a red carpet event. And Vanessa's eyes swept over Ji-Eun with the kind of critical assessment you'd give a used car you were thinking about buying. Well, at least the makeup artist did what she could with what she had to work with, Vanessa said, and Patricia laughed, that sharp, cutting laugh that seemed to be a family trait. And Keisha's hand tightened around the makeup brush, but she said nothing because jobs in Atlanta weren't easy to come by, and making enemies of the Richardson family wasn't smart for someone trying to build a career. Vanessa walked around Ji-Eun's chair like a drill sergeant inspecting a soldier, and she reached out to touch the fabric of Ji-Eun's dress. The simple white gown that Ji-Eun had chosen because it reminded her of cherry blossoms in spring, clean and understated and beautiful in its simplicity. "This is what you're wearing?" Vanessa asked, her voice dripping with disappointment, and she turned to Patricia with theatrical disbelief. "Patricia, didn't I send her the information for the designer I wanted her to use? Didn't I make it clear that a Richardson wedding requires a certain level of presentation?" Patricia pulled out her phone, scrolling through messages with exaggerated movements, and she said, "You did, Vanessa, you absolutely did. But I guess some people just don't understand the assignment." The words were meant to wound, and they did, but not in the way Vanessa intended, because each insult was another nail in the coffin of Ji-Eun's patience, another reason for her to remember why she had left the world of power and control in the first place. Not because she was weak, but because she had seen what that power did to people, how it turned love into transactions and family into strategic alliances, and she had wanted something different, something real. But maybe Darius and his family were showing her that real love didn't exist in any world, that people were the same everywhere, selfish and cruel and obsessed with status. "You know what the worst part is?" Vanessa said, sitting down on the velvet couch in the corner of the room, crossing her legs with the confidence of a woman who had never been told no in her entire life. "The worst part is that Darius actually believes this is love. He thinks that just because you're quiet and agreeable that you're going to be a good wife, but I know better. I've seen women like you before, women who come from nothing and latch onto successful men because it's easier than building their own life." The accusation hung in the air like poison gas, and Ji-Eun turned slowly in her chair to face Vanessa directly for the first time since the woman had entered the room. And when she spoke, her voice was still soft, but there was something underneath it now, something cold and sharp that made Keisha take a step back. "Mrs. Richardson," Ji-Eun said, each word carefully chosen and perfectly pronounced despite her accent, "you do not know me. You do not know where I come from, or what I have built, or what I have sacrificed to be here. You see quiet and you think weak. You see different and you think less. But you are wrong." The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable, and for just a moment, Vanessa's confident expression faltered, but then she laughed, a forced sound that didn't quite reach her eyes, and she stood up, smoothing down her dress. "Oh, did I hit a nerve? I'm just trying to look out for my son, trying to make sure he's making the right decision, because marriage is serious and divorce is expensive." She said it like a joke, but everyone in the room knew it was a threat, a reminder that the Richardson family had money and lawyers and the kind of connections that could make a person's life very difficult if they didn't fall in line. But what Vanessa didn't know, what she couldn't possibly understand, was that Ji-Eun's family had the kind of connection that made lawyers irrelevant and money meaningless, the kind of power that operated in shadows and back rooms, where legal systems were just suggestions and consequences were delivered with precision and finality. Patricia's phone rang, and she answered it with an excited squeal. And Ji-Eun could hear a male voice on the other end, loud and jovial, and Patricia said, okay, we'll be right there. Big Mama wants to get photos before the ceremony. She hung up and grabbed Vanessa's arm, pulling her toward the door. But Vanessa paused at the threshold and turned back to Gion with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. One more thing, sweetie, during the ceremony, when the pastor asks if anyone objects to this union, you might want to prepare yourself because Big Mama is seriously considering standing up. She thinks it's her duty to save Darius from making a mistake, and between you and me, I'm not going to stop her. The words were meant to break Ji-Eun, to make her panic or cry or run away, and maybe 3 years ago they would have worked, but Gion just stared at Vanessa with those dark, endless eyes and said nothing. Because what could she say that wouldn't reveal too much, that wouldn't show her hand before the game was over? Vanessa and Patricia left, their laughter echoing down the hallway, and Keisha immediately rushed to Ji-Eun's side, her face full of anger and sympathy. Girl, I am so sorry. That was completely out of line. Nobody deserves to be treated like that on their wedding day. Keisha's kindness was genuine, and it made Ji-Eun's throat tight with emotion, because it had been so long since someone had shown her compassion without wanting something in return, and she reached out to squeeze Keisha's hand, a small gesture that meant more than words could express. Ji-Eun's phone buzzed again, and this time it wasn't Min's, but her father, a man who rarely texted, but when he did, people paid attention, and the message was in Korean. Beta, I have been patient because you asked me to be, but if you are unhappy, say the word, and I will come. No one disrespects my daughter. The message came with a photo attachment, and when Ji-Eun opened it, she saw her father standing in front of a private jet at Incheon International Airport, his silver hair perfectly styled, his black suit sharp enough to cut glass, and behind him stood 6 men in identical suits, their faces expressionless, their posture military precise, and Ji-Eun. That these weren't just bodyguards or business associates. These were soldiers in her father's organization, men who had done things that would make the Richardson family's petty cruelty look like child's play. The wedding coordinator knocked on the door 15 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. Her clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield, and she said with forced cheerfulness, "Okay, bride, it's almost showtime. Are we ready to become Mrs. Richardson?" The question should have filled Ji-Eun with joy, or at least nervous excitement, but instead, she felt hollow, like someone had scooped out all the hope she'd been carrying, and replaced it with cold certainty that this was a mistake, that marrying Darius meant accepting a lifetime of humiliation from his family, a lifetime of being treated like she was lucky to be included rather than valued for who she was. Keisha had finished the makeup and helped Ji-Eun into her dress, and now Ji-Eun stood in front of the full-length mirror, looking at a woman who seemed like a stranger, a woman in white who was about to make promises she wasn't sure she could keep to a man who had stood by and watched his family tear her apart without saying a word in her defense. Her phone buzzed one more time, and this time it was a group chat that included Min Tam, her father, and her uncle Taewon, the family's chief strategist, and the man who had taught Ji-Eun everything she knew about reading people and situations. The message was from her uncle, "Ji-Zina, we are watching the live stream. Say the word and we end this. You don't have to go through with this wedding. You don't owe these people anything." The fact that her family was watching the wedding live stream that Darius had insisted on setting up for friends who couldn't attend made Ji-Eun's stomach twist. Because that meant they had seen everything, the disrespect, the mockery, the way Darius had abandoned her to face his family alone, and she knew that her father and brother were probably sitting in that private jet right now, waiting for her signal, ready to fly to Atlanta and remind the Richardson family that there were consequences for treating people like they were disposable. Ji-Eun picked up her phone with trembling hands and she opened the group chat and she typed a message in Korean that would change everything. Abosi, Opasa, I will go through with the ceremony. But after that, I want you to show them who I am. Show them what they've done. Not yet. What? I want them to know what it feels like to be powerless. She hit send and within seconds, 3 responses came back. Her father with a single word understood, her brother with "It will be my pleasure," and her uncle with "Consider it done, princess." And Gion felt something shift inside her chest, a door opening that she'd kept locked for 3 years, and she realized that maybe her mother was right. Maybe the best revenge wasn't the kind that came fast and hot. Maybe it was the kind that came slow and cold. The kind that let your enemies think they'd won right before you showed them they'd lost everything. You think you know where this is going? You don't. Next chapter is going to show you what happens when Ji-Eun walks down that aisles and Darius' family crosses a line they can never come back from. If you're not subscribed yet, hit that button right now because things are about to get explosive. Comment below, do you think Ji-Eun should marry him or walk away right now? The clock is ticking and the ceremony is about to start. Let's see what happens next. The Grand Meridian Hotel ballroom had been transformed into something that looked like it belonged in a magazine, with white roses cascading from crystal vases, gold chairs arranged in perfect rows, and a string quartet playing classical music that echoed off the high ceilings. But all Ji-Eun could see as she stood at the entrance doors was the crowd of faces turned toward her, 300 people who had come to watch Darius Richardson marry. The quiet Korean woman that his family had spent all morning mocking. The wedding coordinator gave her the signal to begin walking, and Ji-Eun took her first step down the aisle alone, because she had no father here to give her away. No family sitting in the bride section, wearing proud smiles and happy tears. Just empty chairs, decorated with white ribbons and baby's breath that looked more like a memorial than a celebration. Halfway down the aisle, she could hear the whispers starting, the guests leaning toward each other with poorly concealed comments about her dress being too simple, about how small she looked, about how this wasn't what they expected from a Richardson family wedding. And Ji-Eun kept her eyes forward on Darius, who stood at the altar in his custom tuxedo, looking like every woman's dream, tall and handsome, with that $1 million smile that had made her fall in love with him in the first place, back when she believed that love could be simple and pure and separate from the violence and power that had defined her entire childhood. She reached the altar and Darius took her hand, squeezing it gently, and for one brief moment she thought maybe this would be okay. Maybe once they were married his family would accept her. Maybe the ceremony would be beautiful enough to erase the ugliness of everything that had come before it. But then she saw Vanessa in the front row wiping fake tears with a tissue while whispering something to Big Mama, who was shaking her head with obvious disapproval. And Ji-Eun knew that nothing was going to change, that this family had already decided who she was, and no vows or rings or certificates were going to make them see her differently. Pastor Williams, a man with kind eyes and a warm voice who had counseled Ji-Eun and Darius through 3 pre-marriage sessions, stood before them with his Bible open and his smile genuine, and he began the ceremony with words about love and commitment and the sacred bond of marriage, words that should have filled the room with hope, but instead seemed to bounce off the walls like empty promises. Marriage is not just the joining of two people, Pastor William said, his voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. It is a joining of two families, two histories, two futures becoming one, and it requires patience, understanding, and above all, respect for one another. The word respect made Vanessa shift uncomfortably in her seat, and Ji-Eun noticed it. Noticed the way Darius' mother couldn't even pretend to care about the values the pastor was describing, and it made something inside Ji-Eun's chest grow colder, harder, more certain that the decision she'd made in the preparation room was the right one. Pastor Williams moved through the ceremony with practiced grace, asking Darius if he took Ji-Eun to be his lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health. And Darius said, "I do," with confidence that made the guests smile and nod their approval. But Ji-Eun heard the hollowness in it, heard the way his voice didn't quite match the weight of the promise Macon spun. Then it was Ji-Eun's turn, and Pastor Williams looked at her with those kind eyes and asked if she took Darius to be her lawfully wedded husband. And for a moment that stretched like eternity, Ji-Eun said nothing, just stared at the man she was about to marry and wondered what version of herself she would have to kill to make this work, what parts of her identity and power and family legacy she would have to bury to be the quiet, agreeable wife that Darius and his family expected her to be. And the silence grew so long that people started shifting in their seats, and Darius' smile began to falter, and Vanessa leaned forward like she was ready to object on Ji-Eun's behalf, just to save her son the embarrassment. "I do," Ji-Eun finally said, her voice barely above a whisper but clear enough for everyone to hear. And the relief that washed over Darius's face was almost painful to watch, because it meant he had no idea how close she'd come to walking away, how close he'd come to losing her, not because she didn't love him, but because his family had shown her exactly what her life would look like as a Richardson. Pastor William smiled and moved forward with the ring exchange, and Darius slid the diamond band onto Ji-Eun's finger with hands that trembled slightly from nerves or excitement or maybe both. And when it was Ji-Eun's turn to place the ring on Darius' finger, she did it with steady hands, because steadiness was something she'd learned from watching her father negotiate with men who had guns under the table and smiles on their faces. The ceremony was almost over, just one more ritual before they would be pronounced husband and wife. And Pastor Williams opens the floor for objections with the traditional words that most people treated as a formality. If anyone here has reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace. The silence that ever followed should have been brief and meaningless, but instead it stretched and grew heavy. And then Big Mama stood up from her seat in the front row, her substantial frame rising with a kind of deliberate slowness that demanded attention, and the entire ballroom went silent. Even the string quartet seemed to stop mid-arc, and every head turned to watch. As the matriarch of the Richardson family prepared to speak. "I object," Big Mama said, her voice strong and clear despite her 78 years. And she pointed one manicured finger at Ji-Eun like she was identifying a criminal in a lineup. "I object to this union because this girl is not right for my grandson. She is not our kind of people. She doesn't understand our ways, and I will not sit here and watch Darius throw away his future on someone who brings nothing to this family except a language barrier and a bad attitude. The words landed like bombs in the middle of the ceremony, and Ji-Eun felt every eye in the ballroom turn toward her, felt the weight of 300 people waiting to see how she would react, whether she would cry or run or defend herself. But she did none of those things because her phone was buzzing in the small pocket hidden in her dress, and she knew without looking that it was her family responding to what they just witnessed on the live stream. Darius' face went from shock to anger to embarrassment in the span of 3 seconds, and he turned to his grandmother with a voice that cracked under the pressure of the moment. "Big Mama, you can't do this. Not here. Not now. This is my wedding." But Big My Mama wasn't done. She was on a roll now, fueled by years of getting her way and decades of being the undisputed ruler of the Richardson family, and she turned to address the entire congregation like she was delivering a sermon. "Y'all can sit here and pretend this is love if you want to, but I know the truth. This girl saw a successful black man with a good job and a good family, and she latched on like a tick, and now we're all supposed to smile and act like this is okay? Well, I won't do it. I won't co-sign this mistake." Vanessa was nodding along with every word, her face showing satisfaction rather than embarrassment that her mother-in-law was destroying her son's wedding. And Patricia had her phone out recording everything, probably planning to post it on social media later with some caption about family loyalty and keeping it real. Darius looked at Ji-Eun with desperation in his eyes, waiting for her to say something, to defend herself, to prove his grandmother wrong. But Ji-Eun just stood there with her bouquet of white roses in her hands, her face expressionless, her mind calculating how many hours it would take for her family's plane to land in Atlanta, how many phone calls her uncle would need to make to dismantle everything the Richardson family had built. How satisfying it would be to watch these people realize they had humiliated the wrong woman on the wrong day. Pastor Williams tried to restore order, raising his hands and saying something about respecting the sanctity of the ceremony. But his words were drowned out by the rising murmur of the guests, some defending Big Mama's right to speak her mind, others shocked that someone would actually object at a wedding, and through it all Ji remained perfectly still until she felt Darius' hand on her arm, his touch gentle but insistent, and him close to whisper in her ear, "Baby, please, just say something. Tell her she's wrong. Tell everyone that you love me and that we belong together." His voice was pleading and pathetic, and so far from the confident man she'd fallen in love with, the Ji-Eun felt something break inside her chest. Not her heart, exactly, but the last thread of hope that maybe this could work, that maybe love really could conquer all the differences and disrespect and dysfunction that surrounded them. She turned to look at him, really look at him for the first time since the ceremony started. And she saw not a partner who would stand beside her, but a boy who needed his family's approval more than he needed her dignity. And in that moment, Ji-Eun made a decision that would change everything. She handed her bouquet to the wedding coordinator, who stood frozen near the altar, and she walked to the microphone that Pastor Williams had been using, her heels clicking against the marble floor in the deathly quiet ballroom. And when she reached the microphone, she adjusted it to her height and looked out at the sea of faces staring back at her with curiosity and judgment and barely concealed glee at the drama unfolding before them. "Miss Richardson is right," Ji-Eun said, her accented English perfectly clear through the sound system, and the crowd leaned forward, because this was not what they expected. The quiet bride was finally speaking, and they wanted to hear every word. She is right that you do not know me, that I am not your kind of people, that I come from a different world than this one. Ji-Eun continued, and she saw Vanessa's satisfied smile, saw Big Mama nod like she'd won, saw Darius's face crumble as he realized his bride was agreeing with the woman who had just destroyed their wedding. But Ji-Eun wasn't finished. She was just getting started. And what came next would be the beginning of and for the Richardson family's comfortable, uncomplicated life. What Mrs. Richardson does not know, Ji-Eun said, her voice growing stronger with each word, is that the world I come from makes her world look very, very small. And by the time this day is over, she will wish she had been kinder to the quiet Korean girl in the simple white dress, and as if on cue, as if the universe itself was responding to her words, the ballroom doors burst open and 6 men in black suits walked in with a kind of coordinated precision that could only come from military training or something darker. And leading them was Min Son, Ji-Eun's brother, his face carved from ice and fury, and behind him, walking with the unhurried confidence of someone who owned every room he entered, was Park Sang-hoon, Ji-Eun's father, a man whose name made politicians sweat and business moguls bow. And he was here in Atlanta, here at this wedding, here to remind everyone that his daughter was not someone you humiliated without consequences. Hold up, did that just happen? What happened next is going to blow your mind, because you're about to see what happens when a mafia boss walks into a wedding and everyone realizes they've been playing a game. If you're not subscribed, do it now, because the next chapter is going to have revelations, revenge and regret that will leave the Richardson family broken. Drop a comment. What do you think Ji-Eun's father is going to do first? This is about to get crazy. Park Sang-hoon didn't walk into the Grand Meridian Ballroom. He commanded it, and the difference between the two was evident in the way every conversation died mid-sentence. The way the string quartet's violins faded into silence. The way even Big Mama, who had been standing tall and righteous 30 seconds ago, suddenly found her seat again with hands that trembled just slightly as she gripped the armrest of her gold chair. Ji-Eun's father was 72 years old, but he moved like a man half that age. His tailored black suit fitting him like armor, his silver hair swept back from a face that showed no emotion except the cold calculation of a man who had spent 5 decades building an empire that operated in the shadows of 3 continents, and the 6 men who followed him weren't bodyguards in the traditional sense. They were specialists, people who handled problems that couldn't be solved with money or lawyers or polite conversation. Min Jun walked directly to his sister, and without a word he took her hand and kissed it the way their father had taught them when they were children. A gesture of respect and protection that said more than any speech could, and when he turns to face Darius, his eyes were empty of anything resembling warmth or mercy. "So you're the man who thought he could marry my sister," Min To said in perfect English, with just a hint of a Seal accent, and the way he said "thought" made it clear that past tense was intentional. That in Min Don's mind this wedding was already over, even if the paperwork hadn't been signed. Darius opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out because he was staring at the men in black suits who had positioned themselves at every exit of the ballroom. Not blocking them exactly, but making it very clear that no one was leaving until the Park family decided this situation was resolved. And in the front row, Vanessa had gone pale, her expensive makeup suddenly looking garish against skin that had lost all its color. because even someone as confident and oblivious as Vanessa Richardson could recognize real power when he walked into a room and made itself at home. Park Sang-hoon approached the altar with slow, measured steps, and Pastor Williams backed away instinctively, clutching his Bible like it might offer protection against whatever was about to happen. And when Ji-Eun's father reached his daughter, he cupped her face in both hands the way he used to when she was a little girl coming home from school with scraped knees and hurt feelings. Heire said softly in Korean, the word meaning daughter, but carrying so much more weight in the language of their homeland. Why didn't you call me sooner? Why did you let these people treat you this way? His voice was gentle, but his eyes were scanning the room, taking inventory of every face, every reaction, cataloging who had laughed at his daughter, who had remained silent, who had participated in her humiliation. And Ji-Eun knew that her father's memory was perfect and his sense of justice was absolute, which meant that everyone in this ballroom who had contributed to pain was already on a list that would have consequences they couldn't yet imagine. Ji-Eun responded in Korean, her voice stronger now that her family was here, now that she didn't have to pretend to be small and powerless and grateful for scraps of basic human decency. Abosin, I wanted to handle it myself. I wanted to believe that love was enough. I was wrong. Her father nodded slowly, understanding passing between them without need for more words. And then he turned to face the Richardson family with a smile that would have looked pleasant to anyone who didn't know better. But Ji-Eun recognized it as the same expression he wore when he was about to destroy someone's entire existence without raising his voice or breaking a sweat. Mrs. Richardson, Park Sang-hoon said, addressing Big Mama with exaggerated courtesy, I understand you have concerns about my daughter marrying into your family. Please share these concerns with me. I am very interested to hear what you think makes your family too good for mine. The challenge in his words was unmistakable, and Big Mama, who had been so vocal just minutes ago, suddenly seemed to have lost her ability to speak. But Vanessa, either braver or more foolish than her mother-in-law, stood up from her seat and addressed Park Sang-hoon with false confidence that was already starting to crack around the edges. With all due respect, Mr. Park, we didn't know Ji-Eun came from money, Vanessa said, choosing her words carefully, trying to salvage the situation now that she realized she might have made a catastrophic error in judgment. If we had known about your family's status, of course we would have been more welcoming. But Ji-Eun never mentioned that she came from wealth. She works at a bookstore, for goodness sake. How were we supposed to know? The excuse was pathetic, and everyone in the room knew it, including Vanessa herself, because what she was really saying was that respect was something she only gave to people who could prove they deserved it through displays of wealth and status, that her cruelty to Ji-Eun had been acceptable when she thought Ji-Eun was powerless, but was now somehow forgivable because it turned out Ji-Eun's family had money. Sang-hoon listened to Vanessa's explanation with the patience of a teacher waiting for a student to finish making excuses for homework they didn't do. And when she finally stopped talking, he let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable, until people started shifting in their seats and looking at their phones and wondering if they could slip out without being noticed. Miss Richardson, Park Sang-hoon finally said, his voice soft and cold like snow falling in winter, you are right that my daughter works at a bookstore. She chose that life because she wanted something simple, something honest, something far away from the world I built. She wanted to be loved for who she is, not what her family can provide. And you, all of you, have shown her exactly what kind of people you are when you think someone is beneath you. He paused, letting his words sink in, letting the Richardson family begin to understand the magnitude of their mistake. And then he smiled again, that terrible pleasant smile that made Minjun tense, because he knew what came next when their father smiled like, "I am a businessman." Park Sang-hoon continued, walking slowly around the altar like a professor delivering a lecture, and every eye in the ballroom followed him, because no one could look away. No one could pretend this wasn't happening. "I own property in 12 countries. I have investments in industries, ranging from technology to pharmaceuticals to entertainment. I employ over 5,000 people directly and influence the livelihoods of perhaps 50,000 more through my various business interests." He said it casually, and Weske Ponatis Boshan the soak of the weather, but every word was a hammer blow against the Richardson family's pretensions of superiority. Every sentence a reminder that their wealth was nothing compared to what Park Sang-hoon controlled. "I also have friends, very powerful friends, in government, in law enforcement, in the financial sector, people who owe me favors, people who understand that when I ask for something, it is in their best interest to provide it quickly and efficiently." The threat was subtle but unmistakable, and Darius, who had been standing frozen near the altar, finally found his voice, though it came out weak and uncertain. "Sir, I love your daughter. I want to marry her. Whatever my family said or did, that's on them, not on me. I've always treated Ji-Eun with..." It was a lie and everyone knew it, including Darius himself, because a man who truly respected his partner didn't leave her alone to face his family's cruelty, didn't let his mother and grandmother tear her apart without saying a single word in her defense, didn't prioritize his own comfort over her dignity at every turn throughout their relationship. Minto laughed at Darius' declaration, a sound that had no humor in it, and he pulled out his phone, swiping through screens until he found what he was looking for, and then he connected his phone to the ballroom's audiovisual system with a kind of technical skill that suggested he'd done this before, that this wasn't the first time he'd publicly destroyed someone who'd hurt his family. "Let me show everyone what respect looks like in the Richardson family," Minjun said, and suddenly the large screens that had been set up to display photos of Darius and Ji-Eun's relationship were showing text messages instead, messages from a group chat between Darius, his cousins, and his best friend, messages sent just last night while Ji-Eun had been at the hotel preparing for what she thought would be the happiest day of her life. The first message was from Darius. "Y'all, I'm really doing this tomorrow. Marrying the quiet Asian girl. My mama is going to make my life hell, but at least Ji-Eun doesn't talk back or cause drama like Simone used to." The second message was from his cousin Jamal. "You know she's just happy to lock down a Richardson. She probably can't believe her luck." The third message was from Darius again. "Pax, like I could have done better, but she's low maintenance, and she's not going to embarrass me by trying to compete with my mama or run up my credit cards. Sometimes boring is better." The messages kept coming, a year's worth of conversations where Darius and his friends talked about Ji-Eun like she was a pet, or a purchase, or a problem to be managed. And with each new message that appeared on the screens, the guests gasped or whispered or pulled out their phones to record this disaster. And Darius' face went from defensive to panicked as he realized that his private thoughts were now public knowledge, that everyone see exactly what he really thought of the woman he'd been about to marry. Ji-Eun watched the screens without emotion, because Min-chun had shown her these messages 2 months ago when he'd first started investigating Darius, and she'd read them, and cried and convinced herself that they didn't represent the real Darius, that people said things to their friends that they didn't mean, but seeing them now on the big screens in front of 300 people made them impossible to dismiss or excuse or rationalize away. Ji-Eun, baby, those messages, that's not was just talking. That's not how I really feel, Darius stammered, reaching for her hand. But Gion stepped back, putting distance between them, and the physical space felt like a canyon opening up, like the final severing of whatever connection they'd once had. And in the front row, Vanessa was crying now, real tears this time, because she understood that her family's reputation was being destroyed in real time. That by tomorrow morning, everyone in their social circle would know what had happened at Darius Richardson's wedding, and no amount of money or connections or carefully crafted social media posts was going to fix this. Park Sang-hoon waited until the last message had been displayed, a particularly cruel one, where Darius told his friends that marrying Ji-Eun was the safe choice, the easy choice, the choice that won't give me problems. And then he gestured to Main John to turn off the screens. And the ballroom went dark except for the chandelier lights overhead. And in that darkness, Park Sang-hoon's voice carried like judgment from an ancient god who had finally lost patience with humanity's cruelty. Tomorrow morning, Park Sang-hoon said, and his voice was no longer soft or polite. It was a voice of a man who had given orders that ended careers and ended families and ended families who thought they were untouchable. The Richardson family will discover that their primary investor in Richardson Development Group has decided to withdraw their funding. They will discover that 3 of their major clients have chosen to terminate their contracts. They will discover that certain business licenses are under review, that certain tax filings are being audited, that certain properties have suddenly become subject to code violations that will require expensive remediation. They will discover that in the world of real power, not the pretend power of country club memberships and luxury cars, but real power, they are nothing but children playing dress up, and they have angered someone who does not forgive, does not forget, and does not accept apologies once a line has been crossed. The word landed like a death sentence, and Vanessa made a sound like a wounded animal, and Big Mama slumped in her chair, looking suddenly every one of her 78 years. And Darius fell to his knees in front of Ji-Eun with tears streaming down his face, begging for forgiveness that she no longer had the capacity or desire to give. But Park Sang-hoon wasn't finished, because the financial destruction was just the beginning, just the opening move in a game that would teach the Richardson family what it really meant to humiliate someone who came from a world where respect was earned through power and loyalty, not through Instagram followers and designer labels. However, Park Sang-hoon said, and that single word made everyone freeze, because it suggested there might be a way out, a path to redemption, a chance to avoid complete annihilation. I am a reasonable man, and I believe in giving people choices. So here is the choice I offer to the Richardson. You can accept responsibility for how you treated my daughter. You can apologize to her publicly and sincerely. You can acknowledge that your cruelty came from your own insecurities and prejudices, and perhaps will consider reducing the consequences of your actions. Or you can remain proud and defensive. You can tell yourselves that you did nothing wrong, that this is all an overreaction, and you can face the full weight of what happens when you make an enemy of Park Sang-hoon. The choice was clear, but the Richardson family seemed paralyzed, unable to process what was happening, unable to accept that their comfortable life was being torn apart because they'd been mean to a woman they thought was powerless. And as the seconds ticked by with no response, Ji-Eun realized that even now, even facing total ruin, these people couldn't bring themselves to admit they were wrong, couldn't humble themselves enough to apologize sincerely, and that's when she knew for certain that walking away from Darius wasn't just the right choice. It was the only choice, because a family that couldn't apologize when their survival depended on it would never truly change, would never truly accept her, would spend every day of her married life making her feel like she should be grateful they allowed her to exist in their world. This is not over yet. Next chapter is the finale, and you're about to witness the most satisfying conclusion you've ever seen. Ji-Eun's choice, the Richardson family's fate, and a twist that will leave you speechless. Hit that subscribe button, because the final chapter is going to show you what real power looks like and why you should never underestimate the quiet ones. Comment below. Do you think the Richardson family will apologize, or are they about to lose everything? The answer is coming in chapter 5. Don't miss it. The silence in the Grand Meridian Ballroom stretched for 30 seconds that felt like 30 years. And Ji-Eun watched the Richardson family's faces cycle through emotions like a slot machine landing on different combinations of fear, pride, anger, and denial. But nowhere in those expressions did she see genuine remorse or understanding of what they'd done wrong. And that told her everything she needed to know about whether these people were capable of change. Darius was still on his knees in front of her, his expensive tuxedo getting wrinkled against the marble floor, his hands clasped together in a prayer position that would have looked sincere if Ji-Eun hadn't just seen a year's worth of text messages where he called her boring and low maintenance, like those were positive qualities in a piece of furniture rather than a human being he claimed to love. "Baby, please," Darius said, his voice cracking with desperation that came too late and meant too little. "Tell your family that this is all a misunderstanding. Tell them that we can work this out, that we love each other, and that's all that matters." But love wasn't all that mattered. Ji-Eun realized as she looked down at this man who had let his family mock her, humiliate her, treat her like she was lucky to breathe the same air as the Richardsons, and she thought about her mother's words from years ago. "Ola, a man who loves you will build you a shelter from the storm, not throw you to the wolves, and then wonder why you came back bleeding." Darius hadn't built her as a shelter. He'd opened the door and invited the wolves in for dinner. And now that the wolves had teeth marks on their own throats, he wanted her to call them up, like none of it had been his fault, like he bore no responsibility for the choices he'd made, and the woman he'd allowed his family to destroy piece by piece over the past 6 months. Park Sang-hoon looked at his watch, an understated Patek Philippe that probably cost more than the entire wedding budget, and he said with the patience of a man who had all the time in the world, because time was another thing he controlled. 30 seconds have passed. "I gave the Richardson family a choice. I am still waiting for a response." Vanessa stood up from her seat again, her designer dress now wrinkled from clutching the fabric in her nervous hands, and she walked toward Park Sang-hoon with steps that tried to project confidence, but came across as desperation dressed up in expensive shoes. "Mr. Park," Vanessa began, her voice taking on a tone that she probably thought was diplomatic, but sounded condescending even in the face of her own destruction. "I think we've all gotten a little emotional today, and maybe things were said that came across wrong. But you have to understand that we're a prominent family in Atlanta. We have a reputation to protect. And when Darius brought home a girl who wouldn't talk much and didn't seem interested in being part of our social circles, we were just trying to look out for our son's best interests." It was the worst possible response, an attempt to justify their cruelty by framing it as protective concern. And Gion saw her father's expression harden in a way that made Minton take a subtle step forward, ready to intervene if his father's legendary control finally snapped after decades of dealing with people who thought their wealth made them immune to consequences. Mrs. Richardson Park Sangon said, and each word was articulated with surgical precision. You are not apologizing. You are making excuses. You are explaining why you believe your behavior was justified rather than acknowledging that it was wrong. This suggests to me that you have not learned anything from today's events, that you still believe you are the victim in this situation, that somehow my daughter deserved to be humiliated on what should have been the happiest day of her life. He paused, letting his words settle over the ballroom like frost, and then he turned to address the entire congregation. All 300 guests who had come expecting a wedding and gotten an education in what real power looked like when he decided to stop being polite. Let me be very clear about something. My daughter chose to walk away from the world I built because she wanted to find authentic love, the kind of love that exists without conditions or calculations or power dynamics. She thought she found that with your son, Mrs. Richardson. She was willing to give up her family, her legacy, her position in a world you cannot even imagine, all for the chance to be loved by someone who saw her for who she truly was. And you, all of you, repaid that vulnerability with mockery and contempt. Big Mama finally found her voice, though it came out weaker than the commanding tone she'd used when objecting to the wedding just 20 minutes ago, and she said with the stubbornness of someone who had never been wrong in her own mind and wasn't about to start now. We didn't know she was rich. How were we supposed to know? She works at a bookstore. She dresses simple. She don't talk about money or family or nothing important. So yeah, we treated her like she was ordinary because that's what she presented herself as. The words revealed everything that was broken in the Richardson family's value system. The belief that respect was something you earned by displaying wealth and status, rather than something you gave automatically because every human being deserved basic dignity and kindness. Ji-Eun felt something break free inside her chest, not her heart, but the last chain that had been holding her to the hope that this could work. That love could breach the gap between her quiet nature and their loud expectations, and she realized that her father had been right all along when he'd warned her 3 years ago, that leaving their world wouldn't make her normal, it would just make her vulnerable to people who measured worth in dollars and social media followers instead of character and loyalty. Min stepped forward, his phone still connected to the ballroom's audiovisual system, and he pulled up another set of documents that appeared on the big screens. And this time they weren't text messages, but financial records, business filings, property deeds, things that the Richardson family probably thought were private but were apparently child's play for someone with Min-son's resources and connections to access. Richardson Development Group, Min-tun said, reading from his phone like he was presenting evidence in a trial. Current valuation approximately $45 million, with outstanding debt of $18 million, 3 major projects under development that are all behind schedule and over budget, and a primary investor, Jadi Pacific Holdings, that provides 60% of your operating capital. He looked up from his phone soon to make eye contact with Vanessa, and his smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Jadi Pacific Holdings is one of my family's subsidiary companies. We've owned it for 15 years. You've been working for us this entire time, and you didn't even know it. The revelation hit the Richardson family like a physical blow, and Vanessa's knees buckled slightly, and she reached out to grab the back of a chair for support. and Darius made a sound like all the air had been punched out of his lungs. Because what Minton was saying meant that everything the Richardson family had built, all their success and wealth and social status, had been funded by the family they just spent all morning insulting. Humiliating, Patricia, who had been recording everything on her phone earlier, had gone completely pale, her device hanging forgotten in her hand, as she processed the fact that her family's business empire was built on sand, or more accurately, built on money from the Park family, who could withdraw that support with a single phone call. Park Sang-hoon walked to where Ji-Eun stood near the altar, and he placed his hand on her shoulder with a gentle touch of a father who had watched his youngest daughter try to build a life outside his shadow, who had respected her choice even when he disagreed with it, who had waited patiently for 3 years in case she needed him. And now that she did need him, he was here with all the resources and power and ruthless efficiency that made him one of the most feared men in the international business world. "Hi," he said softly in Korean, speaking only to her, even though 300 people were watching. "What do you want? This is your choice. I can destroy them completely, or I can let them walk away with a lesson learned, or I can do something in between. But this is not my revenge. It is yours. Tell me what would make you happy." It was the question Ji-Eun had been avoiding since the moment her father walked through the ballroom doors. Because revenge should have felt satisfying. Destroying the people who'd hurt her should have brought some sense of justice or closure, but instead she just felt tired, exhausted from carrying the weight of trying to be someone she wasn't, trying to fit into a world that had made it clear from day one that she didn't belong. And she realized that the best revenge wasn't making them suffer. It was walking away and building a life so full and rich and meaningful that they became irrelevant, a footnote in her story rather than the main chapter. "I will see," Ji-Eun said, her voice steady and clear, speaking in Korean so that only her family would understand, and then she switched to English so everyone could hear what came next. "I don't want revenge. I want freedom. I want to go home to Seoul. I want to work in our family business. I want to stop pretending that being quiet means being weak. And I want these people to live with the knowledge that they had a chance to know someone extraordinary and they threw it away because they couldn't see past their own prejudices and insecurities." She turned to Darius, who was still on his knees, still crying, still begging for a second chance that he didn't deserve and would never get. And she said, with finality that left no room for negotiation or hope, "Darius, I loved you, or at least I loved who I thought you were, but the man I loved wouldn't have let his family treat me the way yours did, wouldn't have sent those messages to his friends, wouldn't have made me feel like loving me was settling for less than you deserved. So no, I will not marry you, and no, I will not forgive your family, and no, you cannot fix this, because some things, once broken, cannot be repaired." She took off the engagement ring that had been on her finger for 8 months, the 2-carat diamond that Darius had presented to her at a fancy restaurant where he'd hired a photographer to capture the moments for Instagram, and she handed it to him with the same care you'd use to return a library book. And then she turned to her father and said, "Let's go home." Park Sang-hoon nodded with satisfaction, proud of his daughter for choosing dignity over revenge, for walking away with her head high rather than stooping to the level of people who had proven they weren't worth her time or emotional energy. And he gestured to Minshon and the 6 men in black suits, and they formed a protective circle around Ji-Eun as they began walking toward the ballroom exit, leaving behind a ceremony that had imploded, a family that had revealed their true nature, and 300 guests who will be talking about this wedding for years to come, though not for the reasons anyone had expected when they RSVP'd yes to Darius and Ji-Eun's invitation 2 months ago. As they reached the doors, Vanessa's voice rang out one last time, desperate and angry, and still not understanding what she'd lost. "You can't just walk away. We had a contract with the vendors. We paid for this wedding. You owe us an explanation." Park Sang-gun paused, turned back with that terrible, pleasant smile, and said words that would haunt Vanessa Richardson for the rest of her life. "Miss Richardson, you will receive a check for triple the cost of this wedding as compensation for your expenses. Consider it a generous payment for teaching my daughter a valuable lesson about what happens when you trust people who see kindness as weakness. As for the business relationship between Richardson Development and Jade Pacific Holdings, you will receive formal notice of contract termination within 72 hours. I suggest you find new investors quickly, because once word spreads about what happened here today, I doubt anyone in Atlanta's business community will want to associate with a family that treats people the way you treated my daughter. Good luck, Mrs. Richardson. You are going to need it. And that is how you handle disrespect with class and power." Ji-Eun walked away from a family that never deserved her, went home to claim her real throne, and left the Richardsons to deal with the consequences of their cruelty. If this story touched you, hit that like button, subscribe for more stories about karma, revenge, and justice, and drop a comment telling me what you would have done in Ji-Eun's position. Remember, never judge someone by their silence. Sometimes the quietest people have the loudest power. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next story, where we prove once again that karma never loses an address. Peace.